Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. Now this week we're here to cover one of the sort of most underappreciated stories of the Premier League season, not just already this year, but in the last season gone by as well. And that is Crystal Palace under Oliver Glasner, who have now extended their unbeaten streak in all competitions to 17 games. Okay, so this is one that I've took a lot of time to research, and I was almost begging that they didn't lose to West Ham at the weekend because I really wanted to cover sort of Crystal Palace, especially against coming up to their weekend game against Liverpool at home, which is obviously going to be the big test. But as we mentioned at the top of the video, they are 17 games unbeaten. They have won 9 of them and drawn 8, and in them 17 games, that includes their FA Cup semi-final, final, and Community Shield, where obviously they beat Aston Villa, Manchester City, and Liverpool. Very, very good opposition. And to be honest, this is a team who, despite losing Michael Elise last summer, despite losing Aberiaze this summer, have still sort of kicked on, yet to be beaten, of course, in the Premier League. They're in Europe. They beat the first team in Europe over 2 legs. And I want to really explain as to why Oliver Glasner has been so good at Crystal Palace. And I'm going to start right off just from talking about sort of what they do on the ball, probably. So if we just push on sort of the press, so if we can imagine that the blue team are pressing in a 4-2-3-1, let's say, push the counters on here. Now what they usually do is something that we've seen Manchester United do a lot, who play the same sort of formation on paper, which is this 3-4-3, is they move the middle centre-half into midfield. Now Crystal Palace don't do that. So what they do is, depending on which side the sort of goal kick is taken on, they push their wing-backs really high and wide, and they almost split their centre-halves with their goalkeeper, Dean Henderson. So if he's stepping over here, Lacroix there, Mark Gahey there, Chris Richards there, and that creates that sort of 4-back that we've said there. And if we just push it on and to see like sort of what it would look like if they were pressing man-to-man, this is almost what you get. And as you can imagine, this is a very, very sort of slippery build-up shape from Palace, because what they've got now is a goalkeeper who's able to sort of cancel out the one-man forward and be a spare man, especially if he wants to take the ball. Dean Henderson's been sort of known for the last couple of years as being a comfortable ball-playing goalkeeper. But then we've also got the wing-backs pinning high. And I want to speak to you more on the wing-backs later in the video, but just right off the top, I am going to say that since the start of the 24-25 season, Crystal Palace have scored 51 goals in the Premier League. 30 of them have been scored or assisted by their defenders. So that's wing-backs and centre-halves included, which is, believe it or not, 29% of their goals has either been scored or assisted by a defender. Now, for me, that is an absolutely crazy stat, and sort of, in comparison to the rest of the league, I think they will be well and clear in sort of defenders scoring goals. And that all comes from their build-up shape, being able to push their wing-backs forward. And with these 2 number 10s sort of drifting off Mateta, it asks the question, say we've got a team who are pressing in sort of a 4-2-3-1 like we've got on the board here. It asks the question of, if these drop down the sides, how comfortable are they with doing that? If these spin in behind, how comfortable are they going 1v1 all over the pitch? And it's a very, very interesting tactical team, and they've got a lot of sort of key facets, not just on the ball, but off the ball more importantly, which is what we'll go to speak about in a minute. But in terms of the overall game plan from Palace, they are profiling their players in positions where they work their best football. Daniel Munoz has been a player who's been one of the signings of sort of the last 18 months. He was signed actually under Roy Hodgson, but is absolutely perfect for what Oliver Glasner is trying to do. He's got probably one of the best work ethics in the Premier League. And I think his ability to sort of go from one box to the other is immense. And then if we want to push this on in to see what Palace are like if they get into the final third, so we can imagine that a team sort of sat deeper. I'm actually going to push it a little bit towards the edge of the box. So let's say a team is defending in a 4-4-2, which is what we often see with teams like Arsenal, for example. And if we push this forward, so we got a flat line of 5 across, and we move the 2 midfielders up and the back 3 spread. So what Palace like to do in the final third, which is a real good use of the sort of the 3-4-3, and one of the sort of fundamentals of the shape which managers should be using more to get sort of touches from your fullbacks, the extra man on the back post, and that's when you're defending against a fullback. We're talking about Palace sort of playing in these really direct fashions in terms of attacking real fast. I've got their direct speed since the start of the 24-25 season. 1.9 metres per second, third most in the Premier League in that time. Their sequence time is 20th in the league. So that means the time they spend on the ball is the least out of any team. So this is a team who aren't not appreciating the ball, but are very much comfortable in playing in different ways and attacking space. So, and one more stat I've actually got is absolute width, which by Opta means how much or how wide are their constant left and right players. What's the gap between them? They have got the second sort of biggest width across the pitch out of any team since last season in the Premier League. And that's what we're going to go on to speak about now. So if you can imagine it's a 4-4-2 and Palace have sort of caught this blue team in somewhat of a transitional moment, so where the block isn't exactly locked in. If you can imagine that this is Ismail Assar and Daniel Munoz, that sort of triangle there, especially if Chris Richards is stepping up, asks the question of this centre-half to go over and help his left-back. That means that the back line has to shuffle. And already, if you go man-to-man, we've got Mateta on the right centre-half, and then the left number 10, who's actually been Yeremy Pino in the last couple of games, but has also been Kamada and Eberechi Eze last season. They sort of tuck in the fullbacks, which leaves an extra body on the back post for that sort of lofted cross to the back post. So to miss out everyone who's going man-to-man and to get that +1. And their ability to go from here to here in a really fast, direct manner and have their wing-backs on the front foot means that they cannot get the opposition's wingers back into the defensive block to cover that 1v1. And even if the opposition does manage to track the 1v1 at the back post, Daniel Munoz, Tariq Mitchell, very, very good with contact, sort of. We've seen Mitchell's volley actually scored at West Ham at the weekend. Goals like that cannot be sort of underappreciated, and they are manufactured by what Crystal Palace are doing, not just on the ball, but off the ball. And that's where I'm going to move on into now. So I'm just going to move the counters back, sort of, into Palace's 3-4-3 as we know it on paper. And then I'm going to talk to you about how they are so good off the ball, because believe it or not, Palace, not just on the ball, have been really good, but they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. And this is where all their sort of praise has come from. So since the start of 24-25, they have got 14 clean sheets in the league, which is 5th most, which means they're behind Liverpool, Newcastle, Arsenal, and Manchester City. They're actually joint with Manchester City. So we're talking about some of the best teams in the league are only one more clean sheet than them since the start of last season, which just shows you how good they've been. Their direct goals, again, they're tied with Spurs, Brentford, and Bournemouth. They've scored 10 since the start of last season, which is 2nd in the league. Again, we're talking about attacking big spaces. And yeah, I'm going to move on now into what sort of Palace do on the ball, off the ball, sorry, which is really interesting. So I'm actually going to move this up as if this was Aston Villa, because this is one of the games I watched it in detail quite heavily. So if we move this up to touch on sort of the 4-back, and then we've got 2 central midfielders. So Aston Villa were building with 2 central defensive midfielders here, and a back 4, natural, with a front line of 4, like this. So the wing backs are tucked in behind the wingers. The wingers were real wide, so they were really, really pinning them down. And they have a +1 advantage against sort of Morgan Rogers and Ollie Watkins. Now, with the 3-4-3, we've often seen a lot of managers use these players to run out to the fullback. So if this ball is played here, this player jumps over. That is not sort of the role of Crystal Palace, especially when they're jumping out of their block. If they are moving from the block to a press, they do it in a certain way, which I've only really seen them do with this 3-4-3 shape. And that is, these wide 10s are only responsible for sort of blocking here. If the ball is played a little bit slower and this player actually starts to run up with no sort of contact, then we drop out. But what we see a lot from Crystal Palace is sort of this stringing along of the back 5. So we can imagine that the back 5 is flattened out, and we've just mentioned they've got a +1 in the back all the time. What happens is if Tyrone Mings in this game passes it to Ian Maatson, the right wing back jumps and arrives onto the press. What does that mean now for this player? Chris Richards out, player out, and then we're man-to-man across the back line. And that is where Crystal Palace are denying teams of these opportunities, because what they're doing is not just forcing the ball wide and forcing the ball wide through this, but they are boxing out the two central midfielders for the opposition team. If we're going to preview slightly their game against Liverpool, Ryan Gravenberch and players who have played deeper for Liverpool often like to stand over here and create sort of different shapes to ask the question of the press. That might be maybe Palace's kryptonite, but in games where they're against static midfields who just play at literally a 4-2 base and these players don't move into the back line, then this sort of shield around them with Mateta, sort of Kamada, Yeremy Pino, Ismail Assar, who's out injured at the moment, this sort of completely restricts you of the space in behind the forward three. So these two players' roles is not to sort of peel out to these and make these really long bursting runs, which then can open up this. It's to just guard the centre and leave the wide areas to the wing backs to jump and the back five to string along and go man to man. So that is what Palace are doing, which is sort of unlike other teams' 3-4-3 that's gained them so much success and why it's so well coached. And into the last segment now, I'm going to move on into Palace's sort of pressing approach. If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. Okay, so just before we move on into the final section on Crystal Palace under Oliver Glasner, I actually forgot to mention this at the top of the piece, which is probably one of the most important pieces of data through the video, is Oliver Glasner has Palace in 7th in the Premier League since his appointment on February 14th with 86 points from 56 games. So since February 14, 2024, which is a sample size of 56 games, Palace have been the 7th best team in the Premier League. So for me, I think in the Premier League at the moment, he is one of the sort of pound for pound best coaches in the league. And he's doing it in a way that is sort of unorthodox, something we've not really seen before, which is sort of empowering these players with a style that we've mentioned can sit back, can play direct, can also play in between the lines with the goalkeeper joining us in the back line. But now we're going to speak about how they can press when they want to and why that itself is so effective. And it actually uses the same core principles as the defensive shape. So we're going to move on here. So we've got the blue team sort of set up in a traditional 4-2-4, which is what a lot of teams use sort of around Europe at this moment in time. And as we can see, we've got the forward three sort of pinned on the box like this. Now, you would probably expect this player to stand over here and then that player to sort of the left centre midfielder to jump if the ball went in there. So what a lot of teams do, it's what Manchester United do quite a lot. So they are asking the midfielders to arrive into the press with their number 10s actually peeling out wide to sort of deny them the space. But what happens for Crystal Palace is the same as sort of the block that we talked about. So if you can imagine the ball is played to the left centre half, Mateta is looking to curve his run. Now this player, again, doesn't really want to move that much from here. If it's a shorter distance, then we can probably step out. And this is where Oliver Glasner's coaching comes in and it's really sort of inspired Palace in general. But this player is only worried about shielding the passing lane. He doesn't have to stand directly on him, but he's only worried about denying that passing lane because we've got players like Adam Wharton, Will Hughes in behind who can step up onto these players and apply back pressure. Now, again, the same thing happens where we can jump with Munoz and do that same thing where we're sort of stringing along the back four to go man to man. That's what they do a lot. Another thing that they do a lot is when the opposition team have got a spare man in the back line, we can imagine, as we've seen in sort of the Manchester derby, when they use the sort of players dropping out the forward line, Chris Richards is very, very good at stepping out and joining in the press. And Will Hughes managing sort of this right-sided overload here. They time their jumps really, really well. And I think in general, the 3-4-3 is something that is very hard to execute, sort of make it look polished every single time. But Oliver Glasner has sort of really nailed this formation. And it's really good to watch. When you watch it, it's great. Sort of the energy they play on the transition with the type of goals they score. Crystal Palace scores some of the most like slick moves on the break, whether, you know, it's off one player, one touch, off another, then it's a cross-field ball, and then it's cut back to the opposite-sided wing-back. The goals they score are just really, really, really good to watch, and they are a great team to watch. And I think that's what's made them sort of so hard to beat, especially at home. So if I just move it back into sort of Palace sitting in, so I obviously showed you how they're hopping out of the press in this 5-2-3, but what happens when they play a team like Liverpool that they're going to be playing this weekend? Well, if you can imagine that they have a forward front five, that all they're looking to do is deny the opposition the space in between the lines. So how are they constantly doing that? They actually sink their number 10s incredibly deep to stand in these positions here. And what this helps out mainly with is compactness. You know, if you actually have a flat line of sort of four or five players here in between with one leading, the amount of space in between is very, very sort of small. You can have Mateta sort of shielding the ball still into the defensive midfielder, like the sort of front five on the other side when they're pressing. But if we've got a situation like this, this already looks like a really hard situation for the blue team to play around and actually play through. We've got the players who can manage these sort of overloads with three players. We can have the left centre midfielder dropping out, the left mid dropping out, the left back, left centre back, and you can't really factor in too many overloads throughout their entire shape because it's so compact. I think if you drop a player out of there and you actually want to get more ball dominance and you want to pull them out and ask the question of this player, that player's just going to jump instead, and then they keep the flat line of five. And I think this is one of the best things about sort of the way Oliver Glasner uses the 5-4-1 and the 5-2-3 is simply they are a team that can punch upwards and they stand a chance in pretty much every single game. I think some of the complications come when Palace have to take the initiative and they have to go into the final third and they have to break teams down with their own possession, with their own flat line of five, because again, they still have them wing backs holding width. But one thing that Crystal Palace have done from just a club standpoint is get like incredible personnel into the team. Despite losing Michael Elise, despite losing Eze, they've replaced him with players like Kamada, Wharton, Munoz, Lacroix, Tariq Mitchell, Mateta. Like, they've got such good players for this sort of system. And I think they've looked at it and they've employed really well for Oliver Glasner's sort of overall idea. And Jeremy Pino's come in, so we're going to see what he looks like in the next coming weeks. But yeah, a really, really brilliant start to the season from Crystal Palace, and they have been brilliant since the start of last season. Not just in the league, but they've now won 2 trophies after winning their first in the FA Cup against Manchester City. So it's a massive, massive season for Palace, and I think Oliver Glasner deserves huge credit. And I have no problem in calling him sort of one of the most underappreciated managers in the league, because a 17-game unbeaten run in the Premier League when you're not one of the big 6 teams across Europe, across a semi-final, a final in the FA Cup, a Community Shield, you don't really hear of that. And even in the last 29 games, they've only lost 3 of them. And the 3 they lost, 2 of them are Man City away, Newcastle away. And yeah, just before we wrap up, I think it's really important to mention the marginal gains with this Crystal Palace team and what Oliver Glasner's done since he's come in. And we're talking about a team that can punch upwards. And how do we get a team that can punch upwards? Well, we take advantage of the small margins. So I want to show you that in 23-24 season, where Oliver Glasner was only in charge for sort of the last 3 months of the season, Crystal Palace in totality scored 5 set-piece goals, which was joint bottom of the Premier League in that metric. In the 24-25 season, Oliver Glasner's first full season, Palace scored 16 set-piece goals, which was joint second in the Premier League. And already in the 25-26 season, they have scored 2 goals from set pieces, which is the 3rd most behind only Arsenal and Chelsea, who have got 5 each. So we're talking about sort of giving Palace the credit for the recruitment, the manager. They're also taking advantage of the smaller margins on the pitch. And it's just a very small detail I wanted to throw in there about Oliver Glasner, not just improving the team on and off the ball, but that's a drastic improvement from the set-piece record under Roy Hodgson, and that deserves just as much credit as a defensive block or a pattern up front. So yeah, that's going to be all we have time for today on the Overlap Breakdown channel. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel, and we'll be back next week for some more analysis. Thank you.